Special anomalies tend to appear as events that do not quite fit the environments in which they occur. They do not manifest as obvious catastrophes or as shapeless, chaotic phenomena, but rather as situations that unfold with an unsettling precision, almost deliberate in nature. These are irregularities that stand out not for their violence, but for their internal coherence, as if someone had intentionally placed a piece where it does not belong. Amid the natural disorder of the world, configurations emerge that seem too exact, too neatly aligned, patterns that only a mind capable of recognizing order could interpret as something more than mere coincidence. It is here that many researchers and observers situate the idea of an intelligent force, not necessarily visible, one that uses space itself as a medium through which to transmit encoded signals. From this perspective, the universe would be saturated with noise, but also with hidden messages embedded in improbable geometries, exact repetitions, and symmetries that do not correspond to any known natural processes. These signals would not be universal, nor immediately apparent to all forms of life, but instead designed to be recognized only by a species capable of abstraction, measurement, and comparison. Human intelligence, with its persistent drive to find meaning and structure, thus becomes the ideal receiver. This would not be a conventional language, but a form of indirect communication in which the mere act of noticing the pattern already implies that the message has been received. Within this framework emerges the so-called theory of the Jerusalem cube, mentioned only in passing in certain obscure texts preserved in secondary archives of the Vatican Library. These documents, attributed to early compilations and discarded translations, propose an alternative interpretation of the concept of the sacred city. In the more familiar tradition, the New Jerusalem descends from heaven as part of the return of Jesus and represents the culmination of a restored divine order. These unofficial writings, however, describe a structure similar in appearance but radically different in essence. It would not be an organic or symbolic city, but an absolute geometric form, defined by straight lines and perfect angle. In these texts, what distinguishes this manifestation is not its size or its heavenly origin, but its contradiction of the basic rules of nature. While the natural world tends toward irregularity, fractals, and imperfection, this entity is defined by a closed, uniform, and exact geometry. The cube, with its identical faces and right angles, becomes the ultimate symbol of the artificial. Where there is no variation or adaptation, the authors see the mark of something that does not belong to the natural order. For some interpreters, this geometric perfection constitutes evidence of a direct opposition to the benevolent nature of God, a presence that imitates the sacred while draining it of its vital substance. However, other readings within the same text propose a different interpretation. This force, associated with the cube, may not be an external enemy, but an incomprehensible facet of the same divine principle. Rather than creating and preserving, its role would be to dismantle existing structures in order to allow for a complete reformulation of creation. From this perspective, perfect geometry would not be an aberration, but a tool. The cube would function as a reset mechanism, indifferent to life as we know it, yet necessary within a broader cycle that lies beyond human understanding. Throughout history, various cultures and traditions have made indirect references to a similar figure, a great black cube, solid and immutable, invariably linked to the arrival of something inevitable. It does not appear as an object of worship, nor as an explicit punishment, but as a presence that draws near once humanity reaches a certain level of awareness. In these accounts, the cube does not come to be discovered. It comes because it has already been discovered. The mere fact that human beings have become conscious of themselves and of the universe is enough to draw its attention. According to these narratives, the cube does not respond to prayers or attempts at communication. Its advance cannot be halted or hastened, and its trajectory does not seem to be altered by any particular historical event. The countdown does not begin with wars or crises, but with understanding. As humanity refines its capacity for observation and recognizes deeper patterns within reality, the time separating us from the cube's arrival grows shorter, not as punishment nor as salvation, but as the direct consequence of having been noticed. During the so-called lost years of the French Revolution, a brief stretch covering mainly 1785 and 1786, the available sources become strikingly scarce and fragmented. The documentation that had accompanied the earlier stages of the process with relative consistency begins in these years to falter, to thin out, or to vanish without much explanation. Out of this void emerges one of the revolution's most severe moments of institutional and organizational deterioration, a point at which internal dynamics seem to have reached a level of tension that was increasingly difficult to sustain. Many later scholars attributed this decline to a progressive and, according to some analyses, almost obsessive collapse of the new power structure that was struggling to solidify. They argued that this still immature political framework had become extremely sensitive to even the faintest signs of dissent, that suspicion seeped into the ranks of its own leadership, and that, in an atmosphere thick with mistrust, anyone could be perceived as a latent threat. This interpretation, grounded in administrative records and indirect accounts, shaped the historical understanding of the period for decades. Yet there exists a small set of documents that offers a markedly different perspective. These are the writings of the Basque chronicler Iñaki de Arriaga, a name attributed to an author whose figure remains elusive but who appears in several 19th century inventories. His texts, now preserved in the Museum of San Sebastian in the Basque Country, form one of the rare first-hand narrative sources on those obscure 2 years. According to Arriaga, the explanation for what unfolded does not lie solely in power struggles or structural failures, but in a broader social process that had begun to take shape among the popular sectors. The chronicler describes how, amid the uncertainty stirred by political instability, a long-standing belief rooted in the religious tradition of the lower classes began to gain strength. Far removed from the secular and anti-religious rhetoric promoted by certain revolutionary intellectuals, many people in these groups interpreted the escalating chaos as a sign of divine punishment. They held that what was happening was not merely the result of human action, but the manifestation of a higher will, using confusion as a form of warning. According to these accounts, only those regarded as true believers would be able to perceive the hidden messages that God was said to have scattered throughout the turmoil. For them, political fractures, contradictory decisions, and the absence of leadership were not simple human failings, but signs to be observed with care. They believed that by deciphering them, they could identify the right path in a moment when traditional points of reference were falling apart. Arriaga presents these ideas not as a definitive explanation of the crisis, but as an example of how certain sectors of the population tried to make sense of a period that, for many, felt unfathomable. During several winter nights in the densely populated Parisian neighborhoods of Le Marais and Les Halles, different witnesses began describing the presence of a luminous figure moving through the narrow streets without any clear pattern. The apparition appeared as a pale white glow, visible even from a distance, which at first prompted explanations attempting to fit the phenomenon into familiar categories. Many residents attributed the light to electrical discharges from distant storms or to patrols linked to revolutionary activity which, according to rumor, roamed the streets with torches to monitor or intimidate the population. These explanations, though insufficient, offered a reassuring frame of reference for those who wished to reduce the event to a simple visual misunderstanding. Even so, as the nights went on, the phenomenon's persistence and its elusive nature began to wear down the more rational explanations. Even among residents of the most marginalized neighborhoods, people usually more exposed to urban superstitions, yet also more alert to whatever happens around them, the idea took hold that the apparition wasn't tied to weather patterns or to any kind of human activity. The glow seemed to move with a purpose that was hard to pin down, which fueled the sense that it was delivering a message that needed to be watched closely. It didn't take long before people started saying the figure might be some sort of divine messenger, a being whose presence worked as either a warning or a sign meant for the city's inhabitants. The strangeness of the case deepens when we look at the accounts collected by Arriaga, who documented the most consistent testimonies about the phenomenon. According to these records, it wasn't just a matter of misreading stray lights, but rather the repeated description of a pale, whitish form moving through public streets with traits that didn't match anything ordinary. It had no wings or features typical of conventional religious imagery, but it did have a multitude of eyes that appeared to float around its outline, an appearance unsettling to both believers and skeptics. The reports also mentioned that the entity moved at speeds no human could reach, and on more than one occasion, crossed the thresholds of certain homes without leaving any trace of forced entry on doors or windows, as though the material barrier meant nothing to it. All these observations eventually created an atmosphere of widespread unease. The population, already strained by political and social tensions tied to the revolutionary process, began linking the apparition to a possible judgment on the country's situation. Fear of a supernatural punishment encouraged a return to more traditional viewpoints, and sectors that had previously aligned themselves with the era spirit of renewal began to pull away. Distrust toward the revolution grew among groups who interpreted the figure's presence as a direct warning about the dangers of abandoning their old beliefs and customs. Although pinpointing the exact nature of an event known only through surviving written accounts is especially difficult, certain interpretations that have emerged in more speculative circles have put forward hypotheses that stray from conventional explanations. Within groups that advocate theories about the presence of non-terrestrial civilizations, some have suggested the possibility of an external intervention whose purpose might have been to alter the normal course of the events described. These proposals, although lacking direct evidence, argue that outside agents could have influenced the chain of decisions made by the communities involved, introducing factors that may have shifted the outcome that would otherwise have been expected. At the same time, another idea has circulated that the events in question may represent a phenomenon tied to disruptions in temporal lines, a concept found mainly in theoretical speculation and science fiction. From this perspective, the incident might have been triggered by the sudden appearance of travelers arriving from a different point in time who, for reasons unknown, attempted to influence the behavior of the local population. Under this interpretation, the written records would be read as indirect testimonies of efforts to sway collective decisions, perhaps with the aim of steering the community toward an alternative scenario from the one that would have unfolded without such interference. Though these proposals remain in the realm of conjecture, they form part of the many interpretations that have arisen in an effort to bring coherence to an episode whose full understanding is still limited. What if that white dot we gaze at every night, always there, steady, seemingly unchanging, isn't what we've always believed it to be? There is a theory, fringe yet fascinating, that suggests the moon isn't a natural celestial body in the usual sense, but rather an ancient artifact, perhaps millions of years older than our own civilization. According to this idea, known as the berserker moon hypothesis, the object ended up in stable orbit around our planet not by chance but as the result of a specific mission, one that's currently in a prolonged dormant phase, as if waiting silently for a signal, a threshold, a condition that has yet to be met. The theory is an extrapolation from a concept found in science fiction literature, specifically in the work of author Fred Saberhagen. In his stories, the berserkers are autonomous machines equipped with artificial intelligence, programmed solely to eradicate all forms of conscious life. These entities don't act indiscriminately. They activate only upon detecting the development of intelligent life that could pose a threat to their original creators. The parallel with the moon stems from this very idea, a machine drifting through the cosmos, seemingly inert until it encounters a rising civilization, one worth observing and eventually neutralizing. According to this speculative view, the moon would function like a berserker in its dormant phase, a stage that could last for eons. During this time, the device remains inert, drifting through the emptiness of interstellar space until it comes upon a suitable environment, such as a young solar system showing signs of complex biological activity. Once settled into a stable orbit, its primary role would shift to remote surveillance, tracking behavioral patterns, technological evolution, and levels of social organization on the target planet. In this way, the moon would not merely be a watcher, but a last resort sentinel. Its activation parameters are unclear, though some speculate they might be tied to the technological or energetic advancements of the observed civilization. In its active phase, the structure might begin exerting an indirect influence on the collective behavior of that civilization. This influence wouldn't be explicit or violent, but rather slow and subtle, operating deep within the collective, unconscious, or manipulating key historical events. This phase could span millennia, adjusting itself to the pace of the species' development. The idea suggests that, rather than immediate destruction, the lunar berserker's initial objective would be to assess the true threat posed by the civilization's progress before determining its final course of action. One offshoot of this hypothesis proposes that the Moon's current orbital configuration, with the same face always turned toward Earth, wasn't always the case. It's speculated that in an earlier stage, its rotation may have been different, and that the present-day synchronization was a strategic adaptation designed to maximize its continuous observational capacity. From this perspective, the locking of its visible face would have marked a transition into its active surveillance phase. Some have even proposed that the Berserker Moon surveillance phase may have begun long before civilization as we know it emerged. Bolder interpretations suggest that its initial activation might have coincided with a pivotal moment in early human history, the domestication of fire by the first Homo sapiens, a breakthrough that marked a qualitative leap in both energy use and cognitive development. From that point on, this seemingly harmless, natural object may have begun a silent watch, gathering data, analyzing our behavior, and perhaps anticipating a point of no return. This has led to suspicions that ancient civilizations' enduring fascination with the heavens, and with the moon in particular, may not have been mere cultural coincidence or a spontaneous expression of symbolic awareness. From Mesopotamia to the Mesoamerican cultures, from Egypt and India to the Far East, the moon has been depicted as a deity, a conscious entity, a central figure in mythologies and calendars. Beyond its practical significance for early societies, some theorists argue that the moon's central role in the collective imagination points to a deeper influence, possibly embedded in the human subconscious through a prolonged interaction with this hypothetical berserker entity. According to this line of thought, it might not be far-fetched to suppose that the very course of humanity, its collective decisions, socio-political development, even its persistent tendency toward organized violence, has been shaped by an external influence of non-natural origin. It is suggested that this object in orbit may have induced, through as yet unknown mechanisms, a permanent state of internal conflict within the human species. Far from being a structural flaw of civilization, this condition would instead be a calculated strategy, designed to prevent technological and peaceful convergence that might allow humanity to reach a stage capable of projecting its influence beyond Earth, and thus pose a threat to other systems. Under this hypothesis, the role of the lunar berserker wouldn't be that of a classically destructive machine, a sudden death weapon designed to wipe out the species, but something far subtler and more enduring, a regulator of human advancement. Its influence would manifest as a constant disruption to the possibility of sustained progress through a series of cyclical events marked by chaos, conflict, and collapse. The goal wouldn't be outright destruction but permanent containment, a way to keep humanity trapped in a loop of gradual self-destruction where every attempt to reach new technological heights is inevitably undermined by internal strife or manufactured crises. This interpretation also redefines the moon's ever-present visibility in our skies, not merely a poetic muse or a natural clock, but a surveillance mechanism that paradoxically appears as a guiding light. Its glow, seemingly benign, becomes, in this reading, a hypnotic stimulus, a form of symbolic restraint that deepens our emotional and cultural dependence on it. It wouldn't be a hostile artifact in any mechanical or overt sense, but a precisely calculated deterrent, a presence designed to hold humanity in a kind of existential trance, captivated by its own lunar reflection and thus dissuaded from looking beyond it. In this way, the moon wouldn't need to act through lasers or visible weaponry to fulfill its purpose. Its mere influence would be enough to keep civilization confined within its own boundaries, perpetuating internal aggression, fragmentation, and contradiction. In this narrative, the berserker's true mission is not to destroy, but to ensure that nothing escapes. And so, held in check by its own orbital reflection, humanity would consume itself before ever becoming a threat to the universe that surrounds it.
Ah, well, madame, you've come to the right place. We have round shapes, square shapes, we even have rectangular shapes. Has your grandson a favorite shape?
Well, he's always liked triangles.
Ah, yes, the triangle, superb.
But I was thinking of something more unusual.
Yes?
Like that shape over there.
Ah, yes, the squiggly shape. Oh, this is a lovely shape.
Yes, that is so unusual. I know he'll like that one. I'll buy it. Yes, I will.
Would madame like me to...
In the realm of mathematics, the development of contemporary security protocols for multimedia content owes a fundamental debt of recognition to the Spanish mathematician Marcelo Holbeck. His contribution to the field has been of such magnitude that in 1973 he was awarded the prestigious Fields Medal in recognition of his discovery of a geometric structure of trans-Euclidean nature, later named the Holbeck figure. This finding has not only marked a milestone in the study of advanced geometry, but has also had significant implications across multiple disciplines, with a particularly notable impact on the security of both analog and digital devices. Within the field of geometry, various bodies and figures have been identified whose representation in three-dimensional space proves unfeasible, whether due to the necessity of operating with parameters of an imaginary nature or the inherent limitations of current computational systems which prevent their reproduction. The impossibility of representing these structures does not imply their theoretical non-existence. Rather, their study has been confined to abstract mathematical models and conceptual simulations. In this context, Marcelo Holbeck succeeded in formulating the hypothesis of the existence of three geometric configurations, whose nature challenges the established principles of spatial representation. According to his studies, these figures would possess properties that, if reproduced in a physical or digital environment, could cause significant alterations in the perception of reality, or even produce adverse effects on security and data processing systems. The complexity of these structures lies in their operation within dimensions that exceed the conventional capacity for modeling, and in the interaction of their parameters with the foundations of projective and differential geometry. The Spanish mathematician drew an analogy between these geometric formations and the indefinite expansion of the number pi, whose infinite nature would theoretically allow it to contain, within its decimal sequence, all conceivable information produced by humanity. However, unlike this purely abstract property, the figures theorized by Holbeck possess a characteristic that sets them apart from any other known mathematical entity. When fully graphed, they would release an expanding energy of such magnitude that it would span 24,050 million light-years in diameter. This extension, according to current cosmological estimates, would surpass even the total size of the observable universe, implying that the manifestation of these structures could compromise the very fabric of reality. Despite the destructive potential associated with their reproduction, the danger these figures represent is mitigated by the extraordinarily low probability of their intentional or accidental generation. According to estimates made by Holbeck and his successors in the field of trans-Euclidean geometry, the likelihood of one of these configurations emerging spontaneously is approximately 1 in 8 billion. This figure suggests that, while the threat is theoretically real, its manifestation in natural conditions or controlled environments is practically non-existent. Of the 3 figures proposed by Holbeck, only the second on the list has been identified to date, formally designated as the Holbeck figure. The other 2 structures remain within the realm of mathematical conjecture, with insufficient evidence to define their exact characteristics or potential effect. These configurations, referred to in certain academic circles as geometric detonators, constitute an extremely restricted field of study, partly due to the inherent difficulty of their conceptualization and partly due to ongoing debates regarding their validity within the framework of modern geometry. Nevertheless, only 2 decades after Holbeck's discovery, the predictions outlined in his research were unexpectedly verified. While the theory maintains that the Holbeck figure is capable of remaining contained within its own structural limits, the development of certain technologies introduced previously unconsidered factors that altered the probability of its manifestation. In particular, the proliferation of the VHS format and the underlying mechanics of analog image reproduction led to an unforeseen scenario. A detailed analysis of the properties of analog video revealed that, due to the nature of magnetic tape storage, each successive copy of a material contained microscopic variations in image distribution. These alterations, a result of progressive degradation and the medium's inherent limitations in fidelity, generated multiple visual signal faults per second. It was precisely within these imperfections, manifested as patterns of noise and distortion, that the accidental and fleeting reconstruction of Holbeck's second theorized figure was detected.
Following the execution of the so-called St. John experiment, the scientific authorities affiliated with the Vatican began raising questions about the possible manifestation of the New Jerusalem on the earthly plane, one not bound to a single dimension of time. The images captured during the experiment revealed a colossal structure whose presence was not only recorded with striking technical precision, but also challenged the traditional frameworks of theological interpretation. The appearance of the object, combined with the experiences reported by those nearby, led to a direct questioning of the phenomenon's divine nature. Rather than invoking a sense of communion with the sacred or triggering any form of spiritual revelation, witnesses consistently described an atmosphere of confusion and a complete absence of transcendence. In response, certain ecclesiastical analysts proposed a hypothesis that the manifestation did not correspond to the prophesied heavenly Jerusalem, but rather to a form related to the figure of Metatron, a being acknowledged in some strands of Jewish mysticism. While Metatron does not appear explicitly in the canonical books of Christianity, references or allusions to him persist in various Near Eastern religious sources. Though he is also absent from the Quran and the Torah in terms of theological weight, his symbolic presence in mystical and apocryphal writings has maintained a significant, if marginal, role in esoteric and theological discourse. According to some ancient accounts, Metatron might represent an imperfect emanation of God, a kind of duplicate or distorted echo of the Creator. This rupture would be understood as a fundamental transgression, an incursion into a sort of primal fracture in the cosmos, perhaps the only detectable flaw in the general order of existence. Based on reports compiled by the Vatican's research body, it has been suggested that certain historical events tied to the figure of Christ may have triggered this anomaly. Specifically, the period between the crucifixion and the resurrection is seen by some theologians as a suspension of divine authority, a kind of temporal void during which the ontological coherence of the universe was compromised. Within that framework, it is proposed that the appearance of Metatron may have emerged as a direct consequence of that rupture, not as a deliberate act, but as a spontaneous manifestation of a fragmented divinity unable to contain its erratic reflection within creation. This entity, lacking full divine authenticity, would have begun to exert an inconsistent influence on the world, projecting a semblance of divinity without necessarily aligning with the values traditionally associated with God in Christian doctrine. Since then, according to these interpretations, Metatron has continued to manifest in various forms. The primary conflict faced by Vatican authorities following the expeditions into the dimension altered by the entity known as Metatron was not limited to the phenomenon's immediate effects, but extended to its active projection into our own timeline. According to later classified reports, it was determined that those individuals who managed to return from the incursion were in some way imbued with the very presence of Metatron. This contact implied more than a spiritual or psychological mark. It allowed for a kind of expansion or dissemination of the entity, described by specialists as an almost viral growth, capable of replicating itself or projecting into ordinary reality. Given the high risk it posed, travelers were immediately subjected to isolation protocols at maximum security facilities, specifically designed to contain exposure to unclassifiable phenomena. They were confined to large, reinforced chambers with no defined timeline for release. Although these individuals had undergone intensive, specialized training to face events of extreme physical and psychological complexity, the isolation soon began to take its toll. It wasn't long before two of them chose to end their lives, a tragedy initially interpreted as the result of emotional collapse brought on by confinement and the trauma of their journey. However, the real problem began after their deaths. The containment measures in place failed to prevent their decomposing bodies from undergoing a radical transformation. Large fissures formed in the thoracic regions of both corpses, from which metallic structures began to emerge, non-Euclidean in geometry, and seemingly expanding of their own accord. This growth wasn't limited to the bodies. It soon began to affect the facility itself, located at the time on the outskirts of Zurich. The complex walls, once thought impervious to conventional damage, began showing signs of material corruption, as though a new form of matter were imposing itself upon the existing one. Lacking a technical response, the authorities turned to a group of Orthodox rabbis, experts in Kabbalistic symbolism and exorcism. They proved to be the only ones capable of slowing and ultimately halting the spread of the anomaly. By inscribing the symbol of Metatron at specific structural points, a symbol that, paradoxically, represents the very entity they were trying to contain, they managed to establish a kind of seal that temporarily stabilized the situation. Without their intervention, some experts agreed, the phenomenon could have escalated to catastrophic proportions, potentially rupturing the space-time continuum on a planetary or even universal scale. Though this episode was scrubbed from public records and omitted from all official communications, its impact on the highest echelons of the Vatican was profound. In the final stretch of Pope Francis' pontificate, the matter was addressed in a series of closed-door meetings that directly confronted the question of what role the next pope should assume in light of the growing evidence of Metatron's existence. The debate was no longer about the possibility of its presence, but about its meaning within Christian cosmology, a force parallel to God, whose existence appeared destined to subvert the very foundations of traditional faith. These deliberations, intense yet discreet, laid the groundwork for a potential redefinition of the Church's theological framework in response to a presence that not only challenged dogma, but threatened to exceed it entirely. Over the years, individuals said to possess an alleged condition of being time travelers or originating from other dimensions have been relegated almost entirely to the realm of digital fiction. In most cases, these accounts have been classified as creepypastas, stories created to circulate on forums and websites designed more to provoke surprise than to rest on verifiable fact. However, within this body of exaggerated narratives, there are a few less spectacular episodes that have drawn attention precisely because of their ambiguity and the difficulty of placing them clearly between academic anecdote and contemporary myth. One such case began to take shape in the mid-1990s within the university milieu of Paris. The protagonist was a 22-year-old man of Czech nationality named Jan Kovačič, who had arrived in France on a national scholarship for academic excellence awarded by his home country. His prior academic record showed outstanding performance in mathematics and theoretical physics, which facilitated his admission to one of the city's most prestigious universities. Kovačič was assigned to several advanced courses related to contemporary physics, including seminars in nonlinear quantum field dynamics and models of temporal coherence in subatomic systems, classes attended by a small group of graduate students. From the very first months, his presence began to generate tension. Although his attendance was irregular, that was not the primary source of conflict. What caught the faculty's attention was his persistent tendency to interrupt lectures in order to challenge principles that, within the academic framework, were already considered well established. In particular, Kovačič insisted that certain axioms related to atomic field stability failed to adequately account for what he referred to as structural deceleration movements. According to his argument, these processes not only contradicted accepted models, but also opened the possibility of non-continuous temporal states, an idea his professors regarded as speculative and lacking experimental support. Unlike other critical students, Kovačič claimed to possess concrete evidence to substantiate his assertions. On more than one occasion during formal discussions, he maintained that the necessary evidence was not to be found in any university laboratory, but rather stored at his parents' home in Prague. He spoke of notebooks, diagrams, and records of observations made years earlier, even before his arrival in Paris. These statements, far from strengthening his position, only served to deepen the academic staff's skepticism, who began to see in him a problematic profile, closer to obstinacy than to rigorous research. As time went on, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Kovačič displayed a difficult temperament with disproportionate reactions to criticism and a clear inability to moderate his interventions. Some internal reports mentioned episodes of heated arguments in hallways and seminar rooms. Although no immediate sanctions were imposed, the accumulation of conflicts ultimately led to an administrative decision. The university chose to expel him from the program, a measure officially justified by his inappropriate conduct and his refusal to adhere to established methodological frameworks. Faced with this decision, Kovačič rejected any alternative of academic reassignment or new scholarships. Instead of seeking another institution, he left France and returned to Czech Republic. In Prague, he was awaited only by a cousin who had followed his trajectory with high expectations and who had allegedly provided him with financial support for his trip to France. Toward the end of the 1990s, the name Jan Kovačič resurfaced in official records for reasons unrelated to academia. This time, it was the local police who intervened after receiving complaints from neighbors concerned about unusual activities in the garden of the residence where he was living. Reports mentioned the constant manipulation of improvised devices assembled from metal parts, exposed wiring, and electronic components of varied origin, as well as the presence of several deteriorated drums containing materials with a pungent odor and an unstable appearance. Officers confirmed that some of these containers were in poor condition, with leaks that appeared to be reaching the ground and spreading toward adjacent properties. Given the potential risk, Kovačič was asked to explain the nature of the work he was carrying out. During the initial questioning, he responded confidently and without hesitation. He stated that he was building what he called the Portal of St. John, a structure which, he claimed, he was not designing from scratch but reconstructing from memories that were beginning to fall into clearer order. Kovacic explained that his reference to memory was not metaphorical. He asserted that over time, he had begun to experience increasingly precise recollections of another identity, that of a man named Vittorio. According to his account, Vittorio had been transferred by that very machine from an advanced point in the future, specifically from the year 2097. In this context, he mentioned a central event he referred to as the arrival of the Cube of Jerusalem on Earth, an object whose appearance would have profoundly altered the course of known events. In his narrative, Kovacic claimed that, following this event, the Vatican organized the dispatch of various agents into the past with the aim of studying the object and developing, well in advance, operational versions of the portal of St. John. The purpose of these missions, he said, was to gain historical time by anticipating scenarios that had not yet occurred. The process of travel, as he described it, involved a significant loss of memory, leaving only fragments that had to be gradually reconstructed. Although the content of the statement could be interpreted as a fictional narrative, certain elements began to cause unease among the officers of the case. During routine background checks, significant inconsistencies emerged in Kovacic's personal history. There had never been contact with parents, siblings, or other immediate relatives. On different occasions, he had claimed that his parents died at the time of his birth and that he was raised by an aunt. However, when authorities attempted to verify this information, they found no records supporting the existence of such a relative or of any close family member at all. Subsequent inquiries revealed that the identities mentioned in his accounts did not appear in accessible civil archives. There were no certificates, addresses, or records that would allow investigators to reconstruct a family network. To those examining the case, Jan Kovacic appeared in the records as an individual without verifiable ties, without a clearly documented origin, as if his administrative presence had begun abruptly at some point in his adult life. The investigation was definitively discontinued in 1999. That year, several neighbors alerted emergency services after hearing a loud explosion coming from Kovacic's garden. When authorities arrived at the scene, they found no evidence consistent with a conventional detonation. There were no signs of fire, fragmentation, or extensive structural damage to nearby buildings. At the center of the property, only a kind of mechanical platform remained, firmly anchored to the ground. Subsequent analyses detected significantly elevated levels of radiation in the surrounding area, incompatible with any common domestic or industrial explanation. At the same time, all the materials and devices that had prompted the initial complaints had completely disappeared. No drums, apparatuses, or remnants of the supposed stored materials were found. From that moment on, no further verifiable trace of Jan Kovacic was ever recorded. His disappearance was added to the files of missing persons in Czechia, accompanied by a fragmentary dossier and numerous documentary gaps, with no significant progress made in the years that followed.